Without further ado, I would like to go ahead and introduce our keynote speaker for this conference. It is Josh Spence from Alpha Innovations. Josh was originally with the Office of Technology up at the state of West Virginia, and he's now moved to the private sector, which I'm sure is more lucrative, but he's the CIO at Alpha Innovations, and I always like to talk with him because he always has an eye to the future of what's to come next. So if you're looking for advice on what to do next, this is the man I think you all should definitely be talking to. So without further ado, Josh, thank you. Do you want this on, or are you fine with that? Well, because that's for me back there, but this could be for the room. It's up to you if you want.
All right, let me just try real quick. Is that okay, or is it not? If it's not, let me try with the mic. See which is better. Is that better? Is that a little bit? Okay, I'll use the mic, make sure everybody can hear me. So thank you so much, Patrick, for the introduction and the invitation to come and speak to you guys today. I'm just bringing up my notes here. I will tell you, though, going from the public sector to the private sector, yeah, there could be money, but the best thing that I've experienced so far was just a couple weeks ago when I was at the legislature. I was presenting to a subcommittee there in the legislature on artificial intelligence, and it's a whole lot easier to present to a legislative committee as a private citizen than it is as a governor appointee. So that definitely makes things a lot easier. So a lot less stress. But let me talk a little bit about what we're going to get into today, and hopefully this will provide you some good insights on technology, cybersecurity, and mainly what I want to get into is a foundational piece that I've discovered over my course in the field of cybersecurity, and then where's it all going? What's the future that we need to consider? So let me find my clicker. Here's a clicker. All right, so just really quick, my background. As mentioned, I'm the Chief Information Officer for Alpha Innovations, formerly known as Alpha Technologies. So it's a longstanding West Virginia technology managed service provider here in West Virginia, been in 25 years this year. And we rebranded to Alpha Innovations this late last year and officially at the start of the new year to more align with where technology is going to where it used to be. But that's a whole nother topic, not for today. I did serve as the Chief Information Officer for the state of West Virginia under the Justice Administration, and then I was the Chief Information Security Officer under the Tomlin Administration. And then I'm also a Cyber Operations Officer in the West Virginia Air National Guard. And that's where I first got into cybersecurity. So let's talk, let's start with the conversation around cyber risk management. All right, so my first role that got me into technology was in the Air National Guard, and then I was able to pivot into a role. At the time, the title was information assurance, and that's what we called it before it became cybersecurity. It was information assurance. And while in that role, I was an enlisted airman responsible for several different programs, the communication security program, which is all about crypto, the computer security program, and the emission security program. Emission security's a great one to do some research on. You can find some stuff about how spying worked and all that stuff back in the day. But that was my role, and my role was to execute what was already established, right? Because big Air Force, big DOD already had policies, procedures, standards, everything in place. So I was just there to execute what was already set as the standard. And there was times where I'd get a little frustrated going, man, I really wish I had more authority, more ability to make the decision. And so then the opportunity to go down to the state as a state employee to do the Chief Information Security Officer role came available, and I was excited about it and went down there really, really excited. And you got to be careful what you ask for, because right out of the gate, I faced what I call the dreaded question, because you got to think this is 2015, and cybersecurity is now starting to hit mainstream media regularly. The whole concept of hacking and threats is starting to become a buzzword, and it's moving beyond just technology to where non-technologists are now asking, what does this mean? You know, what do we think? And so this question was the question I got hit up by state officials, members of the legislature on a regular basis. And I hated the question. I really, really hated the question. And just to kind of give you some understanding of what's wrong with the question, are we secure? Well, one, if we answer yes to that question, you can recognize there's implications, right? Right out of the gate. Oh, we're good? Okay, you don't need any more money, any more people, or to change anything. Well, that's definitely not the answer. But if I answer no, are they going to immediately question my ability, and are they going to give me the time to actually explain why it's no? Maybe. So I felt like the question failed to tell the real story. So what did you do? Okay, so first I'm going to tell you what not to do. And that is, don't, in those situations, start going into a deep dive technology conversation with that person. They probably won't follow, and you're just going to miss the opportunity to have a meaningful conversation about what really needs to be talked about. So don't do that. You also, I'm not a big fan of telling the story of the latest cyber hack. That is what salespeople do that don't understand cybersecurity, and is a means to get in the door to try to scare people to buy stuff, is they talk about all the hacks and what's going on, and it's just a scare tactic. Again, I don't like that approach. And then definitely don't say, hey, we just need to restart. We need to replace everything, upgrade everything, because you're going to get a big no there, right? So don't do those things. So what was my option? Well, I decided, what if I could reframe the question away from are we secure and illustrate that there's actually a better question that they should be asking, and then enable a better answer by doing so. And so that's what I was able to do. And I'll give you the way in which I did that. And here's my question. Now, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but if you picture that I'm at the Capitol building, I'm having state officials asking me this question, I pivoted on them, right? Pivot, that's another good cybersecurity word. I said, pretend I'm the fire marshal. Just follow me for a moment. Pretend I'm the fire marshal and ask me if the building we're in is fireproof. It's a very rhetorical question, right? Nobody expects the building to be fireproof. We all recognize that's not going to be the case. Yet, isn't fire a problem? Couldn't it happen in the building? Absolutely. So what do? We manage the risk, right? We put preventive measures in to prevent a fire from occurring, and there's standards and requirements about building standards that are seeking to prevent a fire as preventive measures. Should there actually be a fire, right? What would happen? There are responsive measures, an ability to pull the fire alarm. There's a fire extinguisher, and the fire department rolls, right? So we put preventive and responsive measures in, and ultimately we're managing the risk. Because the cost of making this building, for example, fireproof, would be astronomical. Are you going to just spend all your money just to address the risk in that way? Not unless it's justified, right? That means have to be justified by the ends you're after. So this is how I would pivot the conversation. And of course, it worked because it was something the person I was talking to could easily recognize and understand what I was getting at. So then what did I do? I gave them the question they should be asking. Do we understand our cyber risk? That's the question you want them to ask, and then you can answer. Because if you're translating the problem, and I don't like calling it a problem because that alludes that you can solve it, and you're never going to fully solve it. You're going to always manage it. But if you can translate what your answer is in terms of risk, you can usually hit the mark of getting action, right? Because now what we can do is we can measure, we can prioritize, we can mitigate risk, and ultimately we manage the risk. And this is really, really important. And we'll talk a little bit more why I think it's a good foundational piece of the puzzle if you're going into this field to understand. And that goes into this. I've been, around in the creation of what is today cybersecurity from what it was as information assurance, and I see this very commonly, especially from people entering into the field. The Achilles heels is they see everything as either a 0 or a 1, and that's a problem, and we're going to talk about why. So the trap of binary thinking when you're trying to approach cybersecurity is very common. And let's talk about why I think this exists, right? So the binary mindset in cybersecurity exists for one of the reasons. When you get into the field, typically you start seeing examples of previous compromises, and then you start reading about them, seeing examples, seeing videos, actually doing hacking using Kali Linux in a lab environment, and pop in a box using an XP box, which we'll talk about XP in a minute, with, Kali Linux or even easier GUI Cobalt Strike, you find out how easy it can be to compromise systems. Doesn't mean it's always easy. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying is that unfortunately there is a lot of easy targets. And I'll give you a couple easy, obviously phishing. We're talking about phishing in a minute. So they were talking about it a second ago with the goldfish. So phishing exercises, right? Those are very common nowadays. Employees get phished on purpose to see if they'll click that link. That's actually kind of a fun thing when you get to do it on the back end because you get to come up with really creative ways. So when I was at State, the team that I had doing that, they would get really creative. And so one time they sent out an email to a select group of, random generated group of State employees. And they were just cracking up because people still click the link. And what they did to make it funny for them was they signed the email in the signature, Robin, your data. Still worked. Robin, your data. That's okay. We trust Robin, your data. We're going to click the link, not hesitate. So they got a pretty good number of clicks on that one. They thought that was hilarious. But the best one that I think it still holds the record for click rate was when they sent an email out to State employees, and this is really mean, but this is exactly what your threat actor is going to do. And they told them all that Amazon had started a new program, free Amazon Prime for a year for public servants. If you are a government employee, click here. And the click rate was astronomical, right? Because that's how that works. Now, we can talk about why we don't want our cyber defense hinging on a user clicking a link, but that goes into a whole nother discussion of secure by design, which we don't have time today. But my point I'm making is hacking is easy in some ways when you're looking at some of, there's some ways that it's really elementary. And that right there, I think, leads to this miscalculation. If it's easy to hack, it must be easy to fix. And that's where it's not. It is absolutely not. I'm sure there are some things that you can do that don't take a lot of effort, but it's more to it than the control change that you're trying to implement. So let's dig a little deeper. Let's see. Why are these systems so easy? So one, early technology evolution, right? So in the beginning, if anyone was going to buy a computer or a mainframe because these things were not readily available, the only reason you could convince anyone to buy them is because you could illustrate a return on investment. It was all driven from a return on investment, and that was the goal. So all implementation was centered around, I'm going to put this mainframe in, this computer system, whatever it might be, because it's going to save me money so that I can be more efficient, more effective, whatever it might be. There were minimal cyber threats at the time, right? So early on, there weren't a lot of people out there hacking anything for a number of reasons. One, the internet wasn't a thing where it was so easy to touch every system out there. Two, no YouTube, no Reddit, no ability to go see how it's already done because it's already published. So there just wasn't a lot of threats. There were some, but not a lot early on. Common early practices were around just, again, setting it up so it'll work without any mindset of security. So the whole feature set around role-based access probably didn't exist in a lot of systems. It was more so just admin or not. And then if you needed configuration, let's say on the network, well, let's just put an any rule on the firewall. That way we know it'll work, right? Sure, it'll work then, but what's the point of your firewall? Again, this all happened pretty commonly. Unfortunately, to some extent, it still does. And then ultimately what we see is information assurance, what it used to be called. It barely ranked as an afterthought. So you see all this proliferation of technology with this type of approach, no wonder. There's just so much opportunity out there to compromise and compromise easy. So what does this lead us to? Well, the challenges in cybersecurity, it's complex. And let's talk about how it's complex for a minute. All right, so everyone should be aware of the CIA triad, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So let's talk about a couple of those for just a second. Confidentiality, right? We're trying to keep sensitive information protected, right? Only those who should see it will see it, right? So that's one piece of the puzzle we want to make sure that we account for is the confidentiality of information. And what we saw early in cyber hacking was the stealing of information, right? So people would just steal information off of the databases. That was a common way to do it. The database would be accessible through a public website, and you could dump the entire contents of the database. This was a common cyber attack, but sometimes had limited value, right? Because it depended on the data, on if the data was useful, right? So is the data useful? Depends. We'll talk a little bit more of that in a minute. We're going to skip integrity till later, and then we're going to talk just a moment about availability. So with availability, we saw a shift in attacks and availability with ransomware, which were highly lucrative. Why? Because now you had an angle to make money. You were stopping businesses from operating, halting their ability to make money or do anything that they need to do unless they paid a ransom. And they were paying, and they still pay, right? Because if they don't have the protections in place, the mitigations in place, and ultimately if the availability doesn't come back to them, the business will fail, so they'll pay the ransom. I'll make a note, though, there's another aspect of availability cybersecurity professionals will miss. And that's when you hear someone say, oh, if you want to make that system secure, turn it off, disconnect it, and let's go bury it in the ground. It'll be secure that way. No, it won't. Because, again, availability is a tenet of cybersecurity. So what I'm getting at is you can't layer on security to the point where the system doesn't operate or it is so degraded it impacts the business. So you have to balance your controls. And this is one of those areas that I think you see a miss that happens, right? You get overzealous on putting the controls in, and then now the system doesn't work as it's intended to. So let's break down, how do you even know what the cyber risk is? If we're talking about cyber risk and you need to be able to translate it and share it, how do you even capture it? What are we doing to calculate it? So there are some key factors here in cyber risk that we'll go over. First one is vulnerability, a weakness in the system, right? These are common, and this is usually where a lot of people start in the career, because what are you doing? You're getting in the field. At some point, you're getting an opportunity to get on a Kali Linux box in a lab, and you're trying to break into a box. You got to know the vulnerabilities to get into that box. You're understanding that there's a weakness, right? And these are published, obviously, with severities. But that's only one factor. That's not the only factor, right? Is it exploitable, right? If the vulnerability exists, but in the way in which it exists in your environment, it can't be exploited, what's the level of risk? Well, it changes, and you have to understand that because that matters. Threat actor capability and intent. Is there a threat actor that's actually going after this vulnerability? Do they have an intent? And these three factors are all linked to each other in a significant way, but you want to make sure that you're looking at all three and understand them. Just a quick moment, as you should be aware, right? There's a big difference between a publicly known vulnerability that has a patch and one that does not. A 0 day, right? So you might be finding out about vulnerabilities, one, because the manufacturer of whatever the system is, software, whatever, has already identified it and has published a patch for it. But then there's also the concept of a 0 day, meaning it's a vulnerability that's now being exploited, but there's no actual patch for it. And then the question becomes, is it being exploited in the wild, and what's the intent toward your organization? But all of these factors come into play. There's one that usually gets missed because it's not a question for IT typically to answer. It's a question for the business to answer. And this is where, again, it's so important to understand you got to talk about the risk. And that's impact, the so what. If it gets compromised, what does that even mean? So I can give you an example. I actually had a conversation. The victims in this situation will remain nameless, but let's just say it was an entity that was needing some support in my previous role. We got them on a phone call. They had been hit with ransomware, and of course, our first question to them is, okay, what's impacted? And they didn't quite catch what we were asking, because their answer was, well, the systems are encrypted, right? What systems and what does that mean? Because that matters, right? So in this situation, they had critical systems that were down that were creating a safety risk in their environment. And so that's an important impact to understand, because that matters when you're calculating cyber risk. So let's go through a mock scenario real quick. Found the system, it's outdated, right? It's in the business applications that are supporting the primary portion of the business. Basically, let's say it's a Windows XP system because it's running some super old software that hasn't been updated in 10 years, and this happens even in Fortune 100 companies. This is all realistically a scenario. But they're running this XP machine because it's running this really old piece of software, neither of which now are going to get patched because they're both out of support. So obviously, they're highly vulnerable. And it's supporting a business application. Well, we need to do something about it, right? So maybe what we do is research the problem, understand what the situation is, and say, okay, we know it's an XP operating system. We know about the application. We come up with the idea, let's run the operating system in a Docker container. Let's only load the services in that container necessary to run that application and nothing more. That'll help mitigate some of the threat vector. Then we'll layer on a virtual firewall on top of that to further segment it from the network. All good ideas. Put the proposal together, the hardware, the software, the labor costs, right? We're on track. Leadership decision. Rejects a plan. What? Why would you reject the plan? Application is no longer needed. Yeah, that was great. We had that. We were using it for a long time. Kind of forgot about it. You can just get rid of it. All right, best solution would be to decommission the system. This is driving to the importance of understanding the business. And a lot of people in information technology, I get it. You love the tech. I love tech. I can pick up a new application. It's what I'm talented with. I can learn how to use it really fast. The business stuff is not always as easy. I'm good with technology. But you have to recognize what the technology is there to do, and it's to support the business. So you have to understand the business before you go any further. And the impact here was negligible because they don't even need the application anymore. So if we calculated the risk, we'd know where the risk sits, and then the answer was, oh, well, we could just decommission the system. So technology is a means to an end. We don't buy computers for the sake of buying computers. You have to understand the purpose. From that, you can make sure you're translating technology and technical into the business. Risk is a great way to do so. And then that allows you to provide recommendations in context to the business. Tips for understanding how to do this. Once you go into, whether you're already in the workforce and you're expanding your cyber knowledge, or if you're going into the workforce and you're going to be maybe you're going to be focused in the IT side with security knowledge, which is absolutely needed, or maybe you'll be on the security focused side. But ask questions, right? Seek to understand the business. Be clear with your intentions to say, hey, I want to understand how I help the business win. The better I understand how the business succeeds and how the technology fits into that equation, the better I can protect it, the better I can enable it. And then this ultimately leads to knowing what success looks like. Better prioritization, better recommendations, decisions, actions, outcomes. All right, so let's pivot. We're going to talk a little bit about the future, which right now is artificial intelligence. And it's a buzzword for a reason, but it is very important that we understand some of it. And so we're going to get into that for just a second. So first, to set a baseline on AI, everyone knows that AI is a very broad general term. It's been around since the 1950s, and AI technologies has been around for a long time. It's a broad term that covers multiple separate technologies. And so, unfortunately, working in IT, marketing knows that a lot of times decision makers are non-IT people, so they love buzzwords, right? IT loves its marketing buzzwords. That's going to be a bane to your existence because you're going to hear people that aren't technology at all, and they're going to misuse the buzzwords, but that's okay. Just don't laugh in front of them. Now, the last thing here is generative AI, right? That's what's ignited the hype as of late, is all around generative AI. So let's talk a little bit about that and why it's important to cybersecurity. So first, foundational, all technology, including AI, is a tool, and it has a purpose. And you need to know that purpose. And the example I like to use is if we had a carpenter that was an expert carpenter, been doing it their whole career, right? And we asked them to bring a set of tools in that all included every hammer that a carpenter in their craft would use. They'd probably fill this whole table with hammers that are all different, but all would generally could be called a hammer. But they're all different. Why? Because they're all designed to do something very specific. So you need to understand this is no different with technology. Technology is a tool, and you have to understand its purpose to understand how to properly leverage it. So here's another thing that I hear a lot. So now I've moved on from my dreaded question to now the AI statement I hear the most, which makes me chuckle, and that's the AI was wrong. I checked ChatGPT and it gave me the wrong answer. Well, of course it did, because you don't understand what generative AI is as a tool, and you need to understand the tool if you're going to properly use it. So generative AI is much more like a prediction engine than it is a calculation engine. And I think this is kind of funny because it comes full circle for me. What's another tool? A calculator. And so when I was in school a long time ago, right, we had those big scientific calculators that were gigantic. Do they still use those today? I guess maybe, because you can't use your cell phone even though you could do it on a cell phone. But anyways, what was the question to your math teacher? Why can't I do it on a calculator? Oh, well, are you going to carry a calculator around everywhere you go in the future? Apparently, yes. Apparently, yes, we will. Right? We all know we do. But again, if I don't understand the concepts around how a calculator even works, can I use it? No. So again, let's just make sure we understand that this is a tool, and you have to understand how to use it if you're going to intend to use it effectively. All right, so let's test AI for fun, all right? So this will help us understand where generative AI comes into play. Let's provide the text of the Declaration of Independence. Now, of course, I've video recorded this. ChatGPT should have no problem figuring out how to do that. And I don't know if it's going to play or not. Let's see if it'll play. Yeah, here we go. So it just put the prompt in and watch. Within seconds, yeah, no problem. Why can generative AI do that? Because the Declaration of Independence is documented all over the internet. It's been pulled into the large language models, and the ability for it to predict word for word the Declaration of Independence is easy for it, right? Because it's all over the place. It's within the model. However, if I prompt the same AI with the question to provide me the 33rd word, the 5th line, and the 12th sentence of the Declaration of Independence, can it do it? Well, it can do it. Is it right? No. And this is the output of 2 different AI tools with the same exact prompting. Why? Because it's a prediction engine, not a calculation engine. Thinking about what we would do as a human, right? We would literally go pull the Declaration of Independence down and start counting. That's not what generative AI does. And so we have to be very, very careful with these tools, because going back to my talking about buzzwords in marketing, there's a lot of anthropomorphic descriptions around AI. And what I mean is we're talking about AI as it's a human. It thinks, it sees, right? That makes us naturally want to take assumptions on what it can and can't do. And that's the danger. So we have to understand what it can do, what it can't do, and which tool to use in which situation. So obviously generative AI has some limitations, but then why would we use it, right? If it's going to get this wrong, well, I'll show you. So real quick, generative AI, again, we already talked about what it is and what it isn't. Mimic based on training. I love the word mimic. A lot of people will say it's creative. I don't like to use the word creative because it has no subconscious and no self-awareness. So I don't believe you can be creative without those things. But you can mimic our creativity, and I think that's exactly what it's doing. It's been trained off of our creativity as humans, and it mimics it based on its training. It's been trained for a purpose, so then how is it useful? Let's see here. All right. Everybody in here knows who John Denver is, right? Being in West Virginia, this makes this a really easy example. If we went to AI right now, asked it, who is John Denver? No problem. Again, all over the internet, easy to find, easy to predict. Provide us the lyrics to Country Roads. Again, all over the internet, within the large language model, easy to provide, easy to predict. But what if we then said, hey, create a song about the Declaration of Independence in the style of John Denver? Could it do it? Oh, yeah. Hold on, I went too fast. I'm not a singer, so you're not going to get me to sing, but I'll read out some of the, and this is less than 30 seconds, right? Less than 30 seconds, we get out in the fields where the eagles fly under the sweep of the 13 skies, right? 13 colonies, already knows that. A voice rose up through the summer air, it was written in July, saying freedom lives and it's only fair. They gathered strong with steady hand, hearts full of hope for a brand new land, wrote down the truth for the world to see. That all of us are born to be free. And then a chorus from the mountainside to the valleys wide. They stood for justice side by side. A dream declared for every man in quiet strength of this proud land. Oh, let the freedom ring, let the people stand with the courage found in that brave demand. Pretty good, right? Declaration of Independence, sounds like John Denver, less than 30 seconds, right? So there's power in what that tool can do when you understand what its purpose is. Now, I'm not saying that's what you're going to go use it with, but someone will. And of course, we're not going to get into the whole concept of copyright and all of that. The Supreme Court's dealing with that stuff right now with AI. So, all right. So what does this mean for us in the cybersecurity field when we're talking about AI? So unfortunately, some bad news. And the first piece of bad news is the threat landscape's going to get worse before it gets better. Naturally, the threat actors are faster at adopting innovative technology for their means than the defensive side is. Typically because the defensive side is driven out of a return on investment. So we're returning on investment from the latest attack. So the attack has to be generated first. This is going to create a proliferation ability for how to use tech attacks and even improve novice threat actors with more advanced skill sets, because again, they'll have the power of generative AI to write the code, to write the scripts that they might have to lean on someone else to do. They won't have to. The second item calls back to what we talked about earlier with confidentiality, and that's data protection will become paramount. It already has, and it will. And the reason being, let's just think way back when people were just dumping databases off the internet left and right. That was happening all the time. They ended up with gigabytes, now terabytes of data. How valuable is that to them? Depends, right? Some threat actors, right? You got nation state threat actors that have targets. They have absolute targets they're going after, but there are a lot of them that are just trying to make a buck. They're not looking to hit someone. They're looking for weakness. They go hit them, and then they figure out who they compromised. And what they compromised, well, is it valuable? Maybe. But just consider if they dump a database into a flat file and it's highly complex technical data, they may not have the knowledge to understand what they're even looking at to know if it's valuable. But what does generative AI give them? A means to get context quickly. And so any type of data out there, especially sensitive data, whether it's R&D, proprietary, that type of information is going to need significant protection, because if it's lost, the ability to recognize its value will be there very quickly, and it will be sold very quickly. And then, of course, that can be very detrimental to companies. So data protection is huge moving forward. The last one I'll talk about here is integrity in the black box. So we didn't talk about integrity first from a cyber attack side. It's obviously very dangerous when you talk about integrity in a system. And like a logic bomb is a great example of an integrity attack on a system. You've now compromised the system. You've put logic in it at your convenience. You can get access to it at any point. You've compromised its integrity, which we know is a serious threat to our critical infrastructure. But when it comes to AI, the integrity piece comes out of the black box. And when I say black box, this generative AI technology leans a lot on massive data sets and large language models and computation that you can't easily trace back. So it's giving you an output that you can't easily understand how it got to it. So your ability to understand its accuracy and what data it's pulling from creates a problem. And when you have this trust in AI to now make decisions on behalf of you, and you add the fact that you don't quite understand and can't easily see how it's coming to those decisions, an attack on integrity will be even harder to detect if that's what's targeted on the large language model. So integrity and the black box definitely presents a problem. So is there good news out there? There is. And that has to do with the other Achilles heel. And this one I see everywhere. I've seen it all my career. Information technology. Number one Achilles heel in information technology is documentation. Nothing gets documented, ever. Or if it does, only the person who documented knows where it's at. And it's in some kind of crazy shorthand that only they understand. And this becomes a serious, serious problem, because we're talking about a lot of complexity that grows significantly over time. So what does AI present for us in this? It allows us to take documentation more consistently without the lift. So what I mean by that is you can be a system admin, doing changes, doing upgrades. You can keep your shorthand notes on the side and just take them as you work, and then you can just drop them into AI. It will be able to run them through, reformat them, put context there, ask questions if there's a missing piece, and then update the knowledge base with the information. And that right there would be huge. A funny one on the, I think it's pretty funny, is documentation. I was at a cyber exercise this was a couple years ago for the Guard. It was a cyber shield exercise, and I was there escorting some people that were VIPs at the event, but we were talking to some of the people who were in the exercise, right? Some of the technicians that were doing, performing in the exercise. And I overheard something that was funny to me because they said, wait a minute, I just found something else. This is a waste. The network map they gave us is wrong. Of course it is. It's always wrong. And if you don't think it is, then you haven't been out there yet. So just know that if you think you're ever going to go into an environment and right now pull a document that's like a network map and say, oh, that's accurate. No, it's not going to be. So this is where I think AI can be a huge help to us going forward in cybersecurity and information technology. All right, so where do you start with AI? Start using it now. Use it, in my opinion. Use it within the rules that you're allowed to use it when you're doing it for school or anything else. Know its purpose, but then also understand the risks. And the most common risk is divulging sensitive information by using it in a system that's going to train the model and allow it to potentially come back out to someone else in that model. All right, so we're going to wrap it up. 4 things we'll just reiterate here for you is you need to not look at technology when it comes to decisions beyond the technology itself. You got to look at it critically, right? You got to take in all the factors. Cyber risk helps you do that because you then are looking at beyond just a 1 and a 0. Learn the technology and how it enables your business. That's where success lies. Whether it's, again, you're doing the IT side, your security side, or both, you got to be able to enable the business to be the business. Be prepared for complexity and continuous change. This one, no doubt, it's always been the case in the industry. AI only makes that a more exasperated situation because now, there's already predictions out there, and I think they're pretty accurate, that we'll see more innovation in multiple fields of study in the next 10 years than we've seen in the last 50. That's going to drive a lot of fast-paced change. And so then that drives to the last item, just be prepared to never stop learning because it's going to change. It's going to change a lot, and it's going to change fast. So with that, I want to thank you for having me. And then if there's some time, I'll answer any questions.